Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Only Realty property investment series. And looking forward to spending time with you today, just discussing an after purchase and the conveyancing process. So, just firstly, just to introduce myself, or sorry, get started. This is the third module of our 6-session series. So, welcome to those who have joined us before, and to those who joined us for the first time. Thank you for coming along. So I'm just going to go back and share my screen for you so that we can just get started on the formalities and build from there. Back here. Cool. Oh, that's you. Sorry, apologies. Okay, great. So property investment series, and just quickly what the schedule looks like, or what we've been doing is we started on day one. We started with strategy, goals, and the expert team. Day two was asset protection, structure, and financing. Today we're going to be doing the after purchase and the conveyancing process. And then next week we'll be talking about tools and research. So how to really look at your property and understand what you're going to be, or how to investigate the value of that property, and really sort of do some due diligence on your investments. Day 5 is going to be running the numbers of return on investment. And those of you that joined us in session 1, session 2 know that that's my sort of favorite space to talk about, running the numbers. I do have a finance background, but it's vitally important that you understand the numbers on your investment and whether it's actually going to make sense for you for the future. And the last one, day 6 or session 6, will be property management and the Rental Housing Act and evictions. So talking about really, once you've bought your property, you've decided it's a good investment, and now you need to maintain it and make sure it's a good investment for you. For those of you joining us for the first time on a Zoom webinar, just quickly, there's a chat box. So if you look on your screen, there'll be a chat box. If you could please use that just to chat amongst yourselves. If you've got anything to say, any comments while we're doing this talk. And a couple of you guys said hi. Hi, Carol. Rainer, thanks. I'm glad you're ready. Melinda, wave. And Berta, another wave. So you can just use that chat box to chat amongst yourselves, or chat. You can chat with us as well. If you do, however, have questions that you want me to answer, and we'll sort of address the answers at the end of the session, please would you use the Q&A box, so just so we've got that ring fence and away from the chats. So the Q&A box, and that just puts it there. What I'll also do is I'll make sure that within the Q&As that we are able to have all the questions upvoted, so, and you can comment. So if somebody does ask a question that you want to expand on, or you ask a question that's few down and you want that to be answered first, you can vote on it and move it up the line so that we can vote. We can do that for you. It's an interactive session, so please don't let me again speak at you. It's really a session for me to try and give you as much information as we have around the conveyancing process and the after purchase. But please ask questions. It helps me and guides the space to help you understand the nuances of a contract, and then understand the conveyancing process so you can make informed decisions around buying property. If you do ask me a question that relates to something either earlier in the series or later in the series, I'll either refer you to the recordings we have, which are posted on the Only Realty YouTube site, or to the upcoming ones. So if, for example, you're going to ask me a question about return on investment and how to calculate that, I'll refer you to session 5, where we run the numbers. So I won't answer all your questions if they don't relate to the contents at hand today. And the last one, like I just mentioned, we are recording and have recorded all the sessions, and we have posted the earlier ones to the Only Realty YouTube channel. So if you do want to go and view them or share them with anybody, you're welcome to do that. Again, these sessions are free and completely interactive, and for anybody and everybody, Only Realty clients or not. We're just looking to expand on property investment information and just help you guys make informed decisions in terms of your property investment journey. So again, those of you that haven't met me, and just sorry for those of you who are on the last 2, but my name is Grant Smee. I'm the Managing Director of Only Realty, have been for the past 9 years, and have got a great head office team with me. My partners, Brad and Megan, and then we've got a really good, solid national team, as well as our franchisees around the country. Make up Only Realty as a business. I'm also the founder of Epic South Africa, which is a property investment and entrepreneur community, which focuses on education, training, and support of property investors and entrepreneurs around the country. And then last but not least, and maybe this is where I started, was to invest in 2000. I started investing in property as early as 2005 in my mid-20s, and that's really the core of where I've come from in terms of my journey into the space where we now have a services business. I started a property investment portfolio, and I'm very much involved in everything I do is essentially, I'm not going to say tainted, but it is painted with a property brush. So it's my absolute passion and something that I thoroughly enjoy and live for. So just, I'd like to just do a review quickly, just for those of you that didn't attend, or maybe those of you that did, just a review of where we've gone through in the last two sessions, and then get started on today. So first one, I'm just going to revise day one and just quickly talk about those, and then last week's session, and then we'll get into today's. So in the first session, we spoke about strategies and goals. We spoke about when you're getting into investment, you need to decide on the strategy that you're going to use to achieve the goals you want out of property. There's no point just going buying yourself 10 apartments that are going to produce 200 Rand a month net cash flow, creating 2,000 Rand a month income for you, if that's not the intention and you really wanted to generate 100,000 Rand lump sum at the end of year one. So you really need to look at what your goal is, what you're trying to achieve, and that's usually a financial goal. And that financial goal is then aligned with or the strategy is then aligned with a financial goal when you move out to try and achieve what you want to achieve in that space. In that session, we then spoke about capital. So how do you know, property investment is a capital intensive business, whether it's through development, you've got to invest a lot of money when you buy with a deposit, or whether you've got to come up with a transfer duty or transfer cost. It's quite a capital intensive space. But really the core of what you should be doing as a property investor is focusing on a cash flow strategy. So creation of that annuity income. And I actually read quite a relevant statement in a book by Tony Robbins, which was, you're never going to earn yourself financial freedom. You can only invest for financial freedom. And I think it's really relevant in terms of this. You need to be investing the money you're earning into assets that are going to create financial freedom or financial abundance for you in the future. And I really advocate cash flowing properties for that space, creating that annuity income. In that same session, we also then spoke about your power teams, your experts and your professional team. And we spoke about geographic and non-geographic experts, so people who needed to be in the area, on the ground, located nearby to the property, so they could attend to the property as an example, or knew the area very well, and guys that didn't need to be anywhere near the property but needed to provide you with those professional services. So those are two areas we covered. Then last week we then dealt with asset protection, structure and financing, and we spoke firstly about the asset protection structure, we spoke first about financing. We had Clinton from Uber chatting, and then we then spoke about asset protection. And you know, it's important that you realize that the investment structure that you use to buy the property and the finance that you have are interdependent in terms of their relationship. They link into each other. So you need to be very clear which property or what structure you're using to buy, and therefore that determines what finance is available to you, either through institutions or privately. And then I spoke briefly about leverage. So putting down deposit, and this is the massive advantage in property, is putting down a small deposit, financing a bulk part of that property purchase, and then looking at earning the capital appreciation becomes 100% yours. That increase in capital appreciation becomes 100% yours in spite of the finance you have against the property. And that's the real exciting thing about investing in property. And then we also then dug into the 11 other ways that we felt that you could finance or creatively finance getting into the property environment. And I dug into each of those individually during session 2. And the next part, and this was the part that we had a bit of an issue with the video last week, but really about asset protection. So making sure that you protect your assets, and that was vitally important. So I do want to play this for you. And by adequately protecting your assets and ring fencing yourself away from the risk, you become the hero. And that's a hero in terms of being tax efficient as well as risk efficient. And in the future, when you eventually pass away, you'll be estate agent efficient as well. Estate duty efficient as well in terms of your structure. And then we spoke about the asset protection structure, or the generic asset protection structure. Now, my advice remains is that you need to speak to your accountant and your tax advisor in terms of structure that's most relevant to you. But this is the generic structure, which is again, it's you, where you are the trustee of the trust. This is the trust here. You're also a beneficiary, you and your family. And then you have the trust owns the shares in your individual companies, your property investment companies, and your other trading companies that you might have had on. And you stand as the director to those companies. So there's no ownership from your perspective in terms of shares. So your assets aren't in your name, but you do have control via directorship. So that's vitally important. Remembering these are PTY limiteds. The structure does not work with a CC. So if you do have a CC, you would need to convert it into a PTY limited. Sorry, so Nicole says, missed day 2. Is there any way I can get the video? Absolutely, guys. And Ludzi also says, what I'll do is either myself or one of our team will just post in the chat box the link to our Only Realty YouTube channel, and you can take a look at that. So today I'm going to talk about the offer to purchase, and then I've asked one of our attorneys, our conveyancing attorneys, to join us today just to talk about the conveyancing process and really simplify that for you. So we'll have a conversation a bit later. But I'm going to kick off with the offer to purchase itself. Okay. It's important to understand that the offer to purchase is legally binding. So that's the first thing. From a South African point of view, once you've signed it off to purchase and it's been accepted and countersigned by the seller, your offer is legally binding. It's very difficult for you outside of certain circumstances to get out of that agreement. So it's important that you're very considerate of the fact that by signing your name down, putting an offer in, you're binding yourself or committing yourself to that contract and effectively that transaction. It differs in the UK, for example, where you are able to make an offer and then pull out of the contract before exchange of contracts, which is right down the line. But from a South African perspective, contract law, you're in this, you've signed it, you've made the offer, and if it's been accepted, you need to know that it's legally binding. There are essential elements to any offer to purchase. So, you know, when you go to an estate agent, any estate agent, they normally got anything between 4 to 20-page offer to purchases, which seem very, very confusing and very convoluted, and often they are. There's actually only 3 essential elements of any offer to purchase, and that is the identification of the parties involved. So the name of the buyer, name of the seller, whether that's a natural person, it will have their full name and their ID number. If it's 2 or 3 natural persons, will have all their names and ID numbers. If it's a company, it'll have the company name as well as the registration number. So it needs to identify the name of the buyer and the seller, firstly. Second point is identification of the property itself. So you need to identify what is actually being sold or what is being purchased or transferred in the transaction. So you need to identify very clearly what the property is. Now, when you are buying a property or are looking to make an offer, make sure that the address and the earth number or the address and the section number are accurate, because you could end up putting an agreement in place where you're looking to buy or looking to sell the incorrect property. This often happens within sectional title, where your door number 2 doesn't actually link to the section number, which might be section 9 for whatever reason. So just be very, very clear that you're being very clear on door number 2, section number 9 as an example for identification, that you're actually selling the right property or buying the right property, in fact. And then the last thing is the price. So those are the 3 essential elements of any offer to purchase. So name of buyer, identification of parties, identification of what's being sold, and then the price. However, there are other things that get included. Now, often there's a lot of the elements that get included into agreements and offer to purchases, and estate agents have their lawyers draw up these great offer to purchases. And I promise you, no offer to purchase is perfect, because you take any offer to purchase that's been drafted and give it to any attorney, and there'll always be a change. You can send it to 10 different attorneys, there'll be 10 different changes, and you just repeat the process and they'll make more changes. It's just one of those things that you know, not that lawyers try and generate their fees, but they always find something or have an opinion how something should be worded or changed. But the other elements in the offer to purchase, and I'm going to go through quite a lot of these, and I'll go through them obviously one at a time, but there's quite a few just that you need to be aware of. So first thing is the offer must determine also offer to purchase must include how much the deposit amount is going to be, when the guarantees are going to be made, so guarantees from the bank, so the bond guarantee, as well as when the balance is going to be paid. So the deposit, the guarantee, and the balance are very, very important from your perspective, to make sure that you understand when your cash flow is going to be going out, as well as if you're selling, when the cash is going to be coming in. Not to you necessarily, probably to the attorney's trust account, but you need to know when all those elements are going to be paid. The date of the payments is vitally important, and I see I've got a question from Reno saying, is the date and time limit also an essential? So although they're probably essential to any agreement, to a good agreement, and essential that you include those, the date and the time limit into a contract, they aren't essential parts from a legal perspective as part of the agreement. So Cara, the conveyancing we're on later, but attorneys talk about essentialia, so the important, the essential elements of a contract which make it a contract, and those are the three that I mentioned. But Reno, those items that you mentioned are absolutely essential from our perspective to include them into this, and I will get to those shortly. So deposit, when the guarantees are going to be paid, when the balance is going to be paid, how they're paid, sorry, is the other one. So are they going to be paid cash, also by EFT? Are they going to be paid, or are those going to come via bond? Are they going to come via, what method of payments are going to be used? The date of payment, so be very clear. When is the deposit due? When are the guarantees due? When is the balance due? Those are also very important parts, because if you put don't include a date when, for example, the deposit's due, you're never actually going to know whether that contract's proceeding, because yes, they have to put down 100,000 in deposit, but they never put that down that deposit, and you can't put them in breach because you haven't put down a date that those need to be paid by. The occupation date is also vitally important. When do you intend taking occupation? Now, we see a lot where the occupation date is upon transfer of property, which is probably the most advisable, but sometimes that date doesn't necessarily work, because you can't wait 3 months to take access to the property because you maybe sold the property, or you're looking to get access to property sooner. So you need to set a date that suits you. You could also set that at some point, date in the future, much later. And an example of that is if you need vacant occupation and there's a lease agreement coming to an end, you would need to let that lease agreement either run to its natural end, and then not renew that contract and have the tenants move out, or come to an agreement with those tenants that they move out earlier, if you're able to do that. But the occupation date is vitally important that you include there. If you want vacant occupation, I just want to add that, and I don't think I've got it in the slides. If you want vacant occupation, which means you want the property empty when you now transfer the property and you want to move in, you need to be very clear that you want vacant occupation. Because if you come to a stage where you now own the property and they can't offer you vacant occupation, the seller is then in breach. And that often happens where there's a lease agreement in place, where there's a miscommunication, notice wasn't given in time to the tenant decides they don't want to move out. There's several reasons why that might happen. So you really need to be clear. If you want vacant occupation, that you need to state that in the agreement. How much occupational rent is going to be payable if you are moving in prior to the transfer date, so the transfer of ownership date? And it's important, again, that you include this amount in there, because and not only how much rent is going to be payable, but also not only when is the rent, how much is going to be payable, but also what method of payment is going to be. You can just say, well, you need to pay 15,000 rand. It doesn't say where it needs to be paid. It doesn't say what method must be paid, whose account must be paid into, everything else. Now, I recommend that the occupational rental is put at approximately 1% of the purchase price. It's just a nice number to use. And part two is that it's paid to the conveyancing attorney's trust account to sit with the funds that are accumulated in relation to the purchase of the property, and then that gets distributed at the end. Okay. Make sure that any existing lease, now if you're buying or if you're selling, that an existing lease is stipulated within that agreement. The last thing you want is to buy a property assuming you're getting vacant occupation and the actual lease is running for another 18 months, for example, because they might have signed a 24-month lease. So you need to make sure that if there's any existing lease in place, it either says that there's no existing lease in place, or that the existing lease will expire on X date, and that aligns with the actual date of the lease agreement. Don't rely just on that term. Try and get viewing or sight of that lease agreement to ensure that you are adequately protected affected. The last thing you want to do is end up in a situation where you take transfer of property, it's not vacant occupation, but there's a lease agreement that extends way beyond your ownership. You need the property as a home, and you can't do anything because there's a Dutch element to law saying huur gaat voor koop, which basically means the lease stands precedent over the sale, and so if there is a lease agreement in place and it extends beyond the sale period, so dates of occupation, that lease term stays valid for that period of time, and you can't do anything. You can't cancel the agreement. You can't do anything. If a tenant does not want to move out and wants to honor that agreement, you are bound as the new owner to abide by that lease agreement. So it's important that that is determined in there. Got a couple of questions here. Can you really stipulate when you want to occupy the property? So the interesting thing about an offer to purchase, and I refer to it a bit later, is that it's actually such a malleable document. It's such a document that really can be catered around specific situations. You can absolutely stipulate when you want to occupy the property. Obviously, the seller needs to agree to that. So I mean, you can't say, well, I'm going to buy the property now, I'm only going to occupy it in 3 years' time, and there's this big gap in the middle. So you need to, if all the terms need to be agreed upon by both parties, you can't just unilaterally put something in there and expect that as binding. Bertha's asking, attorney fee payment dates aren't part of the OTP. Can we delay paying the attorney fees to delay registration, or is there a better way to achieve a delayed registration date? Okay, so good question. So I wouldn't recommend not paying your attorney. Normally you want to be using an attorney that is on your side, that takes care of your interests. There's two things here, is build a very strong relationship with your attorney. So we spoke about your expert team last week, and I really recommend you spend time and build a relationship with your attorney and tell them when you are buying a property, if you submit an offer to purchase to them that they now need to proceed with and they've been instructed on, just advise them, look, I really need this to now, the transfer to be, come through on the 1st of July for XYZ reason. What date can we get there? So I don't recommend that you don't pay to try and now achieve a delay, but the better way is just to put a delayed registration date within the agreement. So just say that the property will register closer to 1st of July or transfer the 1st of July, and then the conveyancing attorney works to that date stipulated within the agreement. So I think there's a right way to do things, the wrong way to do things. The right way is included as part of your negotiations, as part of your agreement, and then it's binding, and there's no roundabout ways trying to achieve the same result. So Palesa, do you need to wait until the property is registered to move in? No, you don't. You can move in earlier. Again, it's subject to agreement with the seller. You can move in prior to that, but then you will have to pay occupational rent if that is agreed. In some circumstances not defined, but you can expect to have to pay occupational rental if you do move in before you actually own the property. Okay. In terms agreed to offer to purchase, payments of deposit agreed date are not adhered to. Are those valid grounds for nullifying? Absolutely. So I'll refer to breach. I think I refer to breach clauses later. But if any terms of OTP are not adhered to, you can put the other party in breach, and you'd have a breach period, 7 days, 14 days, 5 days, whatever is agreed to in the agreement. And upon the termination of that date, if they haven't rectified their breach, you can then terminate the agreement. Absolutely, like any contract in South African law. Okay. Be very clear when the transfer of the risks and rewards happen. Sometimes it happens at transfer of property. Sometimes it happens at occupation. So if you take occupation of the property earlier, you might then take the transfer of risk and rewards in relation to that property. So again, or it might transfer of risks and rewards, which I don't recommend, might actually happen at the signature and agreement of the offer to purchase. Make sure that you understand that when do you, as the new owner, take transfer of the risk and rewards related to that property. It should be clearly stipulated in the agreement. I would recommend that it's always upon transfer of the property, because, for example, if you're going through the conveyancing process and a wall falls down, lightning strikes and the building falls down, you might not have taken building insurance out on it, and now there's no property there. That should be for the seller's liability, and you should then be able to get out of that property, out of that transaction. So just make sure that you're very clear when the transfer of risks and rewards happens. Now, you think it's an obvious thing to say, but I've dealt with an investor recently who bought a property where they actually the wall fell down around the property. Part of the wall fell down. Firstly, almost hurt somebody, so that would have been a problem. But second part is that the seller used, or tried to use at least, a foot stewards clause, saying, well, you agreed to buy it at X price. You should have or would have known about the wall. And if you didn't, I didn't either, so it's too bad. And I'm not going to do anything about it. And that property transferred into their name. Now, that is an issue, and you need to be very clear on this clause when the transfer of risk or reward happens to you. So make sure you understand that clause. The other one, which is obviously relates to estate agent commission, is it'll define the estate agent commission, how much is payable. Now, the reason I put this in here is not to make sure that you understand that estate agent commission might be due, but just be aware of what it says, who owes that commission. It's sometimes, not always, so it's not always the seller that pays. Sometimes the seller might be using their own agreement and try and sneakily put in that the buyer pays the commission. It's particularly in these distressed property situations where somebody's really motivated to sell a property. They're really trying to get out of the property, but they really want to maximize the money that they, or minimize the money they're going to lose in this property. So they might sneak a clause in there. So if you have signed an OTP and off to purchase without reading clause by clause, line by line, it's vitally important that you understand the changing of one word within that estate agent clause could mean that you could be due to pay the estate agent a lot of money because you missed that. The commission line might say the estate agent commission is 5% plus VAT, which will be payable by the buyer. And it's one word in that entire sentence, long paragraph, and you suddenly become liable for that. Now, you can't say, well, I didn't see it, because you've fully signed that agreement. So just make sure that you either are using your agreement, which is vitally important, agreement that you're comfortable with, or that you go through it line by line, or you have your conveyancing attorney go through it and point out the areas that you need to be concerned about. Something, again, that I didn't put in here, and I should have, which is the appointment of the conveyancing attorney. Now, it's common practice that the seller chooses the conveyancing attorney. I would like to recommend to you that you choose or partner with a conveyancing attorney, and you ensure that in all off to purchases that you have going forward, that you elect the conveyancing attorney as part of your off to purchase. Like I said, it's common practice, but it's not a legal requirement or law that the seller can choose. Often estate agents push back on this because they want to try and control the transaction. They'll try and make sure that one of their preferred conveyancing attorneys are selected. Now, often they are the big guys, or guys that are really trusted in the market. But I would rather just work with somebody that I've built a relationship with to make sure that I can control and keep on top of that transaction as much as possible. So it's absolutely vitally important that you try your utmost to elect as the buyer the transfer attorney. On the flip side, if you are the seller, I'd like to recommend you take control of that as well, and you elect the conveyancing attorney when you're selling the property. So what I'm really advocating here is control of the transaction as much as possible. And how do you control that? Well, you control that by having the person that you have a relationship with overseeing the transfer of that property. Okay, a couple more questions. Can a breach nullify the contract as a whole and immediately, or the demand to fulfill be issued before the contract is nullified? So Bertha, you have to issue a breach. You can't just nullify a contract entirely. So you have to notify somebody of their breach, tell them you've breached, this is where you've breached, and now I'm going to nullify. The reason you can't just cancel on the basis of a breach is that it might be something that's immaterial, and you cancel because I don't know, they didn't initial the, it's not a reason, but they didn't initial the bottom of a page. So South African contract law is very clear that you need to go through a breach process first, and once you've gone through the breach process, you then can go through the process of terminating if the breach has not been rectified. Again, it might be a very small breach. They might have paid, instead of paying 10,000 Rand, they pay 9,950 Rand, so they're 50 Rand short. You can, in terms of contract, put them in breach for 50 Rand, but they're going to rectify very, very quickly. So they might not have realized might be bank charges, and they'll rectify. The law doesn't want to give you the ability just to breach on an immaterial basis. Okay, so can a buyer do that? I was told to sell it. Okay, so absolutely, yeah. I mean, again, Raina, it's definitely a seller can absolutely do that, and it's not always the seller that pays commission. I mean, just think about an auction process. It's always the buyer, and an auction process is no different. An auctioneer is an estate agent by a different name with a slightly different process, where they're taking bids on a property. Estate agents do exactly the same thing. So the contract determines, the agreement, the offer to purchase determines who pays the commission. Okay, so it's vitally important that you understand that, that it's in agreement. Okay, and then even if you change it on the OTP, the law states no, that's incorrect. The law doesn't state anywhere that the seller is always liable. There's no law that says that the seller is liable for agent's commission, not at all. So the commission is based on two things: on a mandate signed by usually by the seller, and by the offer to purchase, which is again signed by buyer and seller. And in terms of that agreement, if the commission line says that the buyer agrees to pay the commission which is due to the estate agent in terms of XYZ mandate, you then in essence agreed to pay for that commission. So again, it's vitally important that you just don't make assumptions about things, that you really read each and every clause and every word to make sure that you don't get bitten down the line. And you know, this is it's very uncommon, but I have seen it where a seller has tried to get that past a buyer. So it's very important that you either have somebody that reads your agreement for you, or you read it. Okay. Footsteps. Okay, so defects, latent and patent defects. So latent and patent defects are either defects that you know of and can see, or that you are unknown. It's vitally important that you as a seller provide a disclosure document where you disclose all the defects that you are aware of. Now, the way to determine this is that the defect that you would, as a reasonable person, have been aware of. An example: if there was a leak in the roof, let's use this better one. There's a leak in a geyser which is in the roof, which you never climb into because you don't climb into the roof, and it leaks into a pan. There's no way that a reasonable person would know that there was a slight dripping leak into a pan of a geyser in a roof that you never climb into. However, if that leak then extends and fills the pan and then leaks down the wall and creates a damp mark on the roof and that runs down the wall, a reasonable person would have known that there's a leak. That's the difference there. And you have a claim against the seller if they don't declare a defect that they could have reasonably known about. The problem with that is that it is a legal process. So you have to go through the process of going to court and suing potentially if you want to do that. So, but make sure as a seller that you provide a disclosure document, and make sure as a buyer you receive a disclosure document. I recommended, however, last week in the professional team that you definitely get a property inspector out. You know, you are spending between 500,000 to a million to 1.5, 2 million rand on a property. That 3,000, 4,000 rand property inspector report is vitally important for you. The property inspector should come out and check out a whole lot of things, including climbing into the roof, checking for leaks, checking for rust, checking for electrical issues that they might be able to identify. So it's definitely worthwhile investing that 3,000, 4,000 rand into somebody coming out and doing those inspections for you if you don't have that skill set. Okay, it's definitely worthwhile. So the 72-hour clause is one that's contentious, and it's for all intents and purposes an escape clause or a gazumping clause. And essentially what this clause says is that you made an offer, the offer's been accepted. I've offered R1 million on property and I'm getting a bond. And then the seller gets another offer of 1.1 million rand. At that point in time, they get an offer of 1.1 million rand. They will then issue you 72 hours notice, so 3 days notice, that they've got a better offer. So you've got two options: either to fulfill all suspensive conditions and proceed with the sale, which sometimes your hands are tied because you're waiting for the bank to send out a valuer, or you're waiting for bond approval, or you're waiting for your money to be released for deposit. There might be some time constraints on you. Or you need to match or better the offer. So it's really a gazumping clause. What it does for the seller is it ensures that they are in position to accept a better offer should it come along during the transfer process before suspensive conditions are met. Okay, I would, as a buyer, ensure that there's no 72-hour clause in any agreement, because generally as an investment buyer we are buying from a motivated seller, so at a discount, and you don't want somebody else to come in and basically take some of your lunch, really. But as a seller, I would ensure that there is a 72-hour clause included in my agreement, just in case somebody else comes along with a better offer in that instance. Okay. So do inspectors go in before signing the offer to purchase non-tobacco? No, they don't. What you do is I would make sure, and I'm getting to it now, is included in your suspensive conditions. So that's important. So you put the offer to purchase in, and you'd have somebody come in and the offer will be subject to, firstly, you having access for property inspector, and secondly, that report not indicating anything of material issue with the property. And then, Carol, can I insist on inspection certificate on property for mold, termites, moist, and even damp? So you can include in, again, offer to purchase are very, very malleable. They're really flexible documents. You can pretty much include, and again, I get to it now, you can pretty much include anything you want in. If you insist on an inspection for mold, termites, moist, and even damp, you can. There are certain regions in the country where you have to do those by matter of law. So the entomology certificate, so the termites and bugs and beetles certificate, is a requirement on coastal towns. The electrical certificates, gas certificate, electric fence certificate, those are all requirements in general. And then the plumbing certificate is a City of Cape Town requirement. So and from my point of view as a buyer in the property, I would ensure that all those certificates are requirements of the sale. You might have a bit of pushback because those inevitably come with repairs and upgrading, because the laws are always changing. Even electrical certificate, we sold a property a couple of years ago that had only recently been built. I think the seller sold after owning it for 2 years, and the electrical repairs, or to bring it up to spec for the compliance certificate, was almost 8,000 Rand. He complained obviously around that, because 8,000 Rand for a property that was relatively new was an issue, but the laws had changed, and earthing of certain things, cabling sizes would change. So a couple of things had to change. And also this property was sitting in a high rise, and access to the electrical circuits and everything else was via a ventilation shaft, which was caused other major issues. So just be considerate of the fact that the laws do change, and accessibility does affect the cost of making a property compliant. So you absolutely can insist on an inspection certificate for property. I mean, in fact, some estates actually include that you must adhere to their rules and regulations around their plants, their appearance of the property, and they won't process transfer without issuing you a transfer certificate from the actual HOA or body corporate. So it is something that you can include there, definitely, and use it as a negotiation tool, obviously. Okay, so let's see, just so here. So, all banks, okay, Gerrit, I'll get to you on your question there, and I'll sort of repeat for everybody. So we'll go from there. So, 72 our clause, VAT clause. So make sure, if you are a VATable, a VAT registered person, and you're buying from somebody who's VAT registered, make sure the VAT clause is very, very clear. Now, there are some conveyancing attorneys that have never done VAT transactions, and it's essential in this instance that you deal with an attorney that dealt with the VAT clauses and VATable entities standing between those two. The reason for that is that if it's not done properly and the right stipulations are put in place into the offer to purchase, there could be a situation that you could owe VAT down the line if SARS decide that the agreement wasn't done in line with what is required in terms of the VAT Act. So it's vitally important that the conveyancing attorney that you use for a VATable transaction is aware of and up to date with VAT laws and how the VAT transaction works. Because usually and this is broad stroke, if there's two VATable entities and there's a property being sold between two VATable entities, it could potentially be, under certain conditions, a zero VAT transaction. So seller doesn't charge you VAT, and buyer doesn't claim VAT, because they just net each other off. But there's very specific situations, very specific conditions that need to be met in terms of the VAT Act. So it's important that the VAT clause is in there for your VATable transaction, and that you have an attorney that can deal with that properly for you. Make sure when you are making an offer that there's an offer expiring. And I can't emphasize this enough. You don't want to be in a situation where you make an offer on a property and the seller takes his time, and meanwhile you're looking for other properties, and you find another one and you put an offer in 2 months later. And 2 months later, because there wasn't an offer expiry on your offer to the first seller, he comes back just when you've made a second offer and says, okay, I'd love to accept your offer, because there wasn't an expiry. So make sure the offer is open for a certain period of time, after which it expires. Now, there's two sides to this. Be sure, firstly, that that's in place so that the offer doesn't extend into perpetuity. But second one is, make sure that the acceptance comes in before the actual expiry, because if it comes in the day after the offer's expired, that offer to purchase essentially has fallen away anyway, and you have to reissue it. So make sure that you're very aware of any dates that you've put in as restrictions or timelines within your agreement to make sure that that offer to purchase is binding once it's accepted and agreed upon. Okay. You then get resolutive conditions, and these are conditions, so that you get resolutive and you get suspensive conditions. Resolutive conditions is something needs to have happened, and then the contract continues. Or no, if something happens, then the contract continues. Where suspensive conditions is conditional upon something happening. So, as an example, obtaining finance, the usual one, and that's the easy one. And I'm going to sort of dig into those a little bit more. Suspensive conditions. Resolutive conditions aren't very common and don't often pop up. I'm just going to look at some questions here quickly. Okay, so just to answer, before I get into suspensive conditions, because that's quite a nice little lengthy piece there, but Gerrit has asked, will banks accept an OTP with electronic signature for bond approval? So not only will the banks not accept electronic signature, but that OTP after purchase is not binding and cannot be used for the transfer of a property. Now that is in relation to the Alienation of Land Act, which specifically requires a physical signature on after purchase. It is the only document that I'm aware of, a contract that I'm aware of, that is specifically excludes the ability for you to use electronic signature. And I can stand to be corrected, but the Electronic Communications Act allows almost all documents to be signed electronically, and also specifically excludes an offer to purchase. So an offer to purchase must be physically signed by the buyer and seller. Now you can have a clause in the offer to purchase which allows you to sign two individual contracts, identical contracts. So seller has a version, he signs that one, buyer has a version, he signs that one, and they're put together, and together they combine into a contract. I can't think of the wording around that, but there is a clause that allows you to align those two individually signed contracts into one to create a signed document, but they must be physically signed. So vitally important. Electronic signatures will not work for an OTP. So Nontobeko says, I sold my first apartment last year, and according to the city of Joburg, only electrical certificate was required. It's good to know that I can stipulate in the future. Yeah, so electrical certificate, but it would have also been an electric fencing certificate and any gas installation. So city of Joburg would maybe only require electrical certificate, but there certainly are requirements around, legal requirements around your electric fencing and your gas installation as well. So that's for sure. And then again, it could be individual. I'm going to insist on certificates in market. So absolutely, Carol, I mean, if you're going to insist on a certificate and just protecting you at the end of the day, you know, so it's vitally important. Cool. So, yeah, so there we go. So Carol confirms there the Electronic Communications Act expressly excludes electronic agreements in addition to the Alienation of Land Act. So that really sort of knocks out the park. Raina's asking, can they physically be signed and then scanned and emailed if they're in your town? I assume they can be scanned and emailed, but then you'd need to also then, they would start the process. And I know the banks are accepting scanned versions at the moment, but then you would need to post that agreement to your relevant conveyancing attorney so that they can then lodge those with when they're doing the transfer. Okay. Cool. So suspense conditions. So this is the fun stuff, and this is really where it really shows you how flexible that agreement is. And again, in a lot of the investment talks I do, I use this line, and a suspense condition simply needs to be legal. It can be anything, just needs to be legal. So an example, and I'll go through the standard ones, but the one I want to use, if you say that a seller needs to have their hair dyed purple on the day before transfer, that is a legal agreement if the seller agrees that they're going to dye their hair purple. It's not an illegal act. Both parties have agreed to it, and it forms part of the suspense conditions. So if that person doesn't dye their hair purple, the agreement essentially falls away. I know it's an extreme example, but it's really how flexible these agreements are. You can include a vehicle in an offer to purchase. You can include furniture. There's so many things that you can include into an offer to purchase that really activates, or the suspense condition activates the agreement itself. Now remember, all your suspense conditions that you list need to actually be fulfilled before the agreement itself becomes binding. So if you say, well, I need to accept finance and need to dye hair purple, and what's the other one? They need to have the roof repaired, and those are all suspense conditions, and you put dates in that, you then sit in a situation where all 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 of those suspense conditions need to be met before that contract becomes actually binding. So it's not binding at the date of signature, It's binding at the date that the suspensive conditions are met. Okay, so hopefully that answers you, Raina, there on that one. I just want to make this, sorry, take it away quickly. Oh, no. Okay, so a couple of standard ones: suspensive conditions, subject to finance. We always know that it's going to be subject to getting bank finance, subject to the bank giving you mortgage. That very nervous space between making an offer and then saying to the bank, hey, listen, you have this cash for me for this property. The important thing here is you take a look at that subject to finance clause, and I want you to ensure that that subject to finance clause says that it is subject to finance that is accepted by me as the buyer. The reason for that is what if you sit in a situation like this? I need 100% bond, and I've done all my calculations at 10% interest rate, as an example. We know it's lower now, but at 10% interest rate, and I'm comfortable at that space. I go out to the bond market and I get an offer from F&B, and F&B comes back, cool, we can give you 100% bond. You're like, thank goodness. But it's going to be at 15%. You've now been offered 100% bond, you've been accepted for finance, and you've been granted finance, essentially. But now you're sitting in a position where that 15% is much higher and actually puts you in a negative cash flow position. You need to make sure that not only is the finance offered that's given to you, but also it's acceptable to you. So make sure that you add in the clause somewhere, either under general or next to suspense condition, that the offer is subject to finance being achieved from a financial institution or other, but is also accepted by me as the buyer. At an acceptable rate, acceptable interest rate, accepted by XYZ date. So make sure it's very, very clear that you need to also accept that finance. There's two reasons I put that in. The finance I get might be the 100% at 10%, but I might have found a better deal. And that finance is no longer acceptable to me because I need different finance for another property. So it gives me a bit of an exit out of an agreement. But the important part is that you make sure that finance is accepted by me. You don't want to be in a position where you get really bad financing rates and you're then stuck. Subject to property inspection, so I refer to what you guys were talking about earlier. Subject to property inspection, absolutely, and I can't advocate this enough. Get a professional property inspector. There's some really good property inspectors. I can certainly recommend a very good one for Gauteng property inspectors. And you know, it's very, very important that you get these experts into the space. You know, I didn't know, for example, that there's 15 different types of building cracks. You know, I thought there was one, like a crack in a wall, but there's 15 different types that give you an indication of certain things happening within a property, of subsidence, of poor building, lack of foundations. You know, there's lots of clay earth underneath the foundation. There's so many indications that you can get from just understanding how many cracks there are and what they're saying to you about the property. So it's vitally important that you get a property inspector in to take a look at it. Subject to approved plans. Now this is becoming more and more important. The Spluma Act, S-P-L-U-M-A, Spluma Act is coming in, and that is going to require that no property can transfer without a Spluma certificate from the municipality, which includes fully approved plans. So that's going to be coming in. I think it's towards the end of the year. Well, who knows? But it is coming in. So, but make sure that you're buying a property that has approved plans, where you've got access to those approved plans, or subject to the getting approved plans in that building. The last thing you want, again, is to buy a property where it's a 4-bedroom house, and next you get the approved plans where it's only 2 bedrooms that are allowed to be built there, and you sit in a situation where you may have to demolish part of the property or need to pay for those additional costs to have the approvals done. Subject to acquiring zoning permission. This is more of a one if you're looking to develop or looking to change of use. You're buying a commercial building that you want to make it into residential student accommodation, for example, and you want to make sure it's got the right zoning, or it doesn't have the right zoning, and the deal is one of the conditions of the deal is that you are able to get this. Maybe it's sold to you saying that, look, we can move you from a single or SR2, single residential 2 zoning into GR4, which is ideal for student letting. So we can do that. So what are the things that we can do, or how do it's sold on the basis of what I want to do with the property, and therefore making the offer, but it must always be subject to actually acquiring that permission. Don't leave it to chance that you're going to buy this property and hope that you get zoning permission or change of zoning. It's vitally important that you do buy that property with that condition in place. you might have to sell another property or sell another asset. You might have to, you know, I don't know, sell your business to buy the house. You might need to sell another property to buy this property. You might need to sell your car. Who knows? You know, I don't know how you're financing your deals or your property, but you might need to sell another asset. And you can actually put that, say that this deal is subject to the sale of XYZ asset at this price. I can achieve and pay for the property. It's very, very important that you include that in. You know, I know it sometimes feels like it's a little bit personal. You know, I've got to sell my business now to buy a house, and I don't want to put that in. But it's vitally important that if the sale of that property, that your business doesn't happen, that the OTP, the offer to purchase, isn't binding on you, because then you're sitting in a position you haven't sold your business and you're stuck into a deal where you actually can't afford to buy that property. So it's very important that that's disclosed and included. An example is if you, for example, earning a foreign income, and you might be thinking, well, okay, and I mean, if you're going to buy on a foreign income now at the moment, I mean, the rand and the pound are super strong, and the rand, oh, sorry, the dollar and the pound are super strong, and the rand is really weak at the moment. So it'd be a really good time to do that. But you might say, well, I need to bring in £100,000, and to bring in £100,000, I need to bring it in at a rate of 24. So this OTP is binding, subject to me only if I'm able to bring my £100,000 in at a rate of 24 in the next 2 months, as an example. So be very specific in that space as well. And then again, subject to any legal event occurring. So you know, your dog's going to have 4 puppies. I want 2 of those puppies to be included in the sale. Dog ends up not having any puppies, and there's, you know, there can be so many conditions that are legal events that can occur that can then activate the offer to purchase. So again, you need to know how flexible this offer to purchase document is. There's the 3 essential items: identification of the parties, identification of the property, and identification of the price. Then there's all the other essential items from our perspective that we want to include. And then there's suspensive conditions, which are things that need to happen to activate this agreement and make it binding. Remembering that you can't have one part of that agreement activate, not the others. So all suspensive conditions need to be met before this contract actually gets going. So is there a reasonable clause? Rena, I don't know if you want about, okay. So is there a reasonable clause? Example, if my house sells for 3 million, but it's worth 1 million. No, you know, I think again, and I stand to be corrected, but I think that contract law assumes that both parties are reasonable and they're an arm's length transaction, and they're making this deal based on their knowledge information. So if I'm selling my property, which I feel is worth 1 million, and you were willing to pay me 3 million rand for it, it's an arm's length transaction. You know, you haven't placed you under duress. I'm not making you or forced you to buy the property at 3 million. You've made me an offer. Hell, it's a good deal for me if I feel it's only worth 1 million. However, if you're buying it at 3 million and then you know somebody who's willing to sell at 5 million, again, that's your prerogative. So contracts, I think the assumption behind contracts is that we are both 2 parties that are not under duress, make a decision at an arm's length transaction based on our best knowledge and information at the time of signing the agreement. So I don't think there is a reasonable clause that you can use to sort of exit a deal if you haven't, you know, maybe done your due diligence, as an example. Okay, cool. So I'm having a bit of an issue with just the Q&A box. I'll try and figure that out now for you. Just see what's going on there. Sorry, there we go. So I'll answer that one. There. Some good questions there, Rana. Thank you. Okay, Nontabeku. Would national lockdown, like state of disaster, be considered a legal event? So I think the Latin phrase is force majeure. I think, and I don't know if all contracts are subject to force majeure events or clauses, but I think there's definitely a space where agreements are binding in spite of. So, and an example I use here is lease agreements have remained binding on tenants in spite of the fact that there's a national lockdown and circumstance and things have been taken out of your control. So the terms and conditions of those contracts have remained binding on both parties. I, as a landlord, cannot just expect you to leave the property. I need to go through a breach process and eviction process if I need to, although there is a stay on the execution of evictions at the moment. But you, as a tenant, are still bound to pay the rental, and any variation to that legally binding agreement, lease agreement at the moment, is reduced to writing. So you were paying 10,000 rand rental, landlord tenant will be 5,000 rand for the next 3 months, reduce that to writing, agree it, and you can pay 5,000. So I don't think national lockdown is considered a legal event. It's an event that's outside of both parties' hands, and I don't necessarily think it affects the nature of the agreement. An example here is, if you were meant to get financed by XYZ date, that after purchase essentially would fall away if you haven't secured that finance, despite or in spite of the fact that there was a national lockdown. So you would then need to go back, and you can, just one thing here, which I haven't said, is with an after purchase, you can extend that to a mutual agreement. So it's going to expire. I need to pay the deposit by tomorrow. I know I'm not going to get it, but I know I'm going to get it in the next 4 days. Hey, listen, Mr. Seller, I'm going to get the deposit next 4 days. Here's my evidence of it happening. Can we please extend the agreement by 5 days? Reduce to right and put an addendum in place to extend that period, and then you're good to go again. So it keeps that agreement active. Make sure that any steps you need to do to extend that agreement beyond the expiry date, the natural expiry date, or the timelines that are provided in the agreement are done before they expire, not after the fact. After the fact, it becomes really messy. Before the fact, you can actually justify that extension. Okay. Cool. Good stuff. Okay. So that's, I mean, that was 40, 50 minutes just on the after purchase, and we sort of skimmed over it. So my apologies, but it really is important that you understand the after purchase is firstly legally binding. It's got essential elements, and it's got elements that you really need to understand and include in your agreement to make sure that you don't put yourself at risk in terms of any property purchase. And then you get to the conveyancing process itself. You know, one thing I do note is that conveyancers like making this space really complicated and convoluted, and I'm going to prove it to you. So I went online and I just checked out and I said, okay, explain flowcharts, explain the conveyancing process, and this is what I got. Let me get here. This is what I got here. So I got this document here, and then I got this one, and I got this one, and by the third one or fourth one, I'm like, I'm done. I'm like not reading any of that stuff. Okay, because it's just, you know, really hectic. So that's why today I've asked one of our attorneys from Hadar Inc., Cara Friedman, to join us and just have a conversation and really simplify the conveyancing process for you to understand just what they do as conveyancers to ensure that the transaction from start to finish is as smooth as possible, and how they fight your corner when you have a relationship with them. So I'm just going to unmute Cara quickly and then just have her do an introduction. Cara, if you don't mind just starting your video for us.
Yeah, sure. Hi, Grant. Thank you very much for the introduction.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for waiting so patiently through my explanation of an OTP.
No problem. You explained it exceptionally well, and I'm sure the participants are very much now more in tune with how an OTP should be drafted and the essential clauses that should appear. Let me just see. Unfortunately, I'm trying to start my video, but it says I can't because the host has stopped it.
Okay, there you go. Does that work?
Let me try now. Yes, there we go.
So you're a real person. Awesome.
Yes,
awesome.
Hi everyone.
Cool, and welcome. Thanks for joining us. So the floor is yours. I'm going to go on mute and sort of switch my video off while you go through the conveyancing process.
Great. Okay, thank you. So basically the conveyancing process will only formally begin once the OTP has been signed by the seller and the purchaser. Once the conveyance has been provided with the OTP, they will then look at the OTP and do a deed search to ensure that the seller who appears on the OTP is in fact the owner of the property which is being transferred. And I think that's essential to ensure that we get, to take away any sense of fraud or anything that could arise with regards to sale of properties. The next thing is they will then request FICA documents from the seller and the purchaser, which will all be dependent on, what type of person is selling or buying the property. Is it an individual? Is it a company? Is it a trust? And then they will request the necessary documentation. After that, the process pertaining to the finances will then take place, and the conveyancer will look at the OTP and determine what is the manner in which the finances, how the property is going to be financed. Is it going to be 100% in cash, or is there going to be a deposit payable with the bonds? And they will then request the necessary. If it's a deposit, they'll provide trust account details to the purchaser in order for the deposit to be paid into our trust account. If there is a deposit payable, it will then be invested in a separate Section 86(4) investment account, which the interest will accrue for the benefit of the purchaser, and the money will stay there for the duration of the transfer and will be paid out on registration. The bond will, if the balance is payable is due in terms of payable by way of a bond grant, then we'll have to wait out the period to ensure that the suspensive condition is fulfilled. The moment we have received confirmation that the bond has been granted, then we can go full-fledged ahead with the transfer process. Once you got that in place, the conveyancer will also look to see what current endorsements are on the property. So is there currently a bond registered over the property? If so, they will then contact the existing bondholder and request cancellation figures. They will then receive the cancellation figures together with details as to who the attorneys are that are attending to that cancellation. And at the same time, if there is a bond fee registered over the property, they will then also communicate with the appointed bond attorneys. And so basically you're forming a triangle of 3 different participants: transferring attorneys, bond cancellation attorneys, and bond attorneys. The transferring attorney basically drafts the process and provides all the necessary information to all 3 of them, to both of them, excuse me. So once the bond cancellation figures have been received, the conveyancer the transferring attorney will draw up the necessary guarantee requirements and send them to the bond attorneys for the guarantees to be provided. And after that, we will then request the seller and the buyer to sign transfer documents or draft transfer documents and get them each into our offices individually to sign necessary transfer documents and provide the purchaser with the pro forma account for payment of the costs and duties which are applicable. At this point, I'd like to add that regarding transfer duty, this is where the date of sale is so important, because the date that you include on your offer to purchase will be the date that we followed through onto your transfer duty declaration. SARS will look to see that the transfer was concluded within a 6-month period. Should you go over the 6-month period, then there will be a penalty amount payable, which is 10% per annum for each completed month, should you not get the transfer through within that 6-month period. So I just wanted to add that, but the conveyancer will provide the purchaser with a pro forma account for payment, and in addition will apply to the council for rates clearance figures. The figures which the seller will be responsible for, in addition to apply for levies, should it be a sectional title, and there's a body corporate registered over it. And basically what happens is that with regards to the rates clearance figures from the council, the council will provide you with figures which will be for 4 to 5 months in advance. So they'll take the average consumption per month and they'll charge the seller for 4 to 5 months in advance. So they secure themselves for 4 to 5 months. Should, in the event of the transfer taking place prior to expiry of that period, the seller will be refunded on the additional amounts paid. Once we have gotten the rates have been paid and the rates clearance certificate's been received, we've received a transfer duty receipt from SARS, all the transfer documents have been signed, and lastly, I'd like to add that the electrical compliance certificate, which is a mandatory requirement, has been, once we have received the electrical compliance certificate, then the conveyancers will then prep the documents, which will be, and they will liaise with the other, we call SIMLs, being the bond attorney and the bond cancellation attorney, and together we will arrange a date for lodgement. Once the documents are lodged in the deeds office, it generally takes between 8 to 10 days from the date of lodgement to registration, but this could vary just depending on the backlog in the deeds offices, how quickly or slowly they're moving along, but that is basically the time period that we tend to go on. In terms of how long the entire process should take from signing of the OTP to completion of registration, this is generally, we work on a 3-month time period for this all to be completed. But it is just a baseline. It's all can vary depending on how the deal is made up, what the suspensives are, the time periods provided for it, and if there's any issues pertaining to rates or anything along the way. But that is basically the conveyancing process in a nutshell. I'm not sure if there are any questions or anything that you'd like me to
add. I don't know if we'll see. So here, Ludzie is asking, in a cash offer transaction, why did the conveyancers never disclose the interest rate to the investment account for the buyer?
No, that shouldn't be the case. That should very much be it should very much be transparent. In fact, you should be able to provide your purchasers with a statement as to the interest which is being accrued whilst the funds are sitting within the investment account.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so I mean, you usually there's an investment account letter that they sign, so that should be fully transparent. If you are using conveyance that doesn't disclose, Lidsey, I think maybe time to look to change conveyancing attorneys.
Sorry.
Go.
Just on that point, we will. It is mandatory to get an authority to invest form completed by the purchaser, which does stipulate that currently, in terms of the new Legal Practice Act, also 5% of any interest accrued on that account has to be swept to the Fidelity Fund, to the Law Society, to the Legal Practice Council. So we currently have to ensure, well, it's actually done automatically now by all the banks, that although the majority of the interest accrued will go to the purchaser, 5% of it is paid back to the Fidelity Fund.
Yeah, the Fidelity funds need to be paid, don't they? So yeah. Cool. And Lucy, I just want to add there, if you're finding that a conveyance is not being transparent, again, this process, this property purchase transparent process needs to be really transparent from a buyer's point of view, from a seller's point of view, from an agent's point of view, and from a conveyancing point of view. If you feel at any stage that somebody's hiding something, maybe just take a step back and revisit the entire transaction to make sure you're not going to get bitten.
Absolutely.
Cool.
It's essential that the purchasers know at the end of the day it is their money and it continues to be their money until registration of transfer. So it is essential that they are aware as to the interest rate that their money is earning.
Absolutely.
Just like it would in any bank.
Exactly the same. Perfect. And you mentioned in the beginning, you said you make sure that the owner is actually the owner of the property.
Correct. That is essential.
And you actually will be surprised how many times people who aren't the owner of the property actually try and sell a property. And the one that often pops up for you guys is where a trust owns the property, but the individual, maybe a trustee or beneficiary, tries to sell it without the necessary trust documents in place.
Yes, and that's why, that's where FICA comes into play, and that's why it's essential to ensure that all the FICA documents you receive from the parties is in line, with exactly what is required, and that the necessary resolutions are signed, protecting you should there be any comebacks, that this wasn't authorized by the trustees.
So as painful as FICA can be for us sometimes, it also protects us. So that's also good news. So Non-Tobacco says, is it true that one should avoid going through the conveyancing process over December because of additional delays due to holidays and people working slower? So let's leave the working slow because I think that's the nature of part of the course.
Yeah, December.
Yeah, but let's use additional delays due to the holidays.
I don't think so. I think, you can definitely get transfers through in December. The D's office just go into more of a skeleton staff than during the year. But in terms of, there's no reason why you cannot get it through. And in today's times, everyone is able to work remotely. So you should still be able to get a successful registration. Yeah,
and the additional cost for you isn't really, there's no real additional cost, even if it does get extended by 3 weeks over that period anyway. So there's, I think if you find a good deal, there's no better time to grab that deal than now, regardless of time of year.
Yes.
Cool. So the next one from Boto is, from time of receiving the pro forma statement, when is payment due? And I assume that's your fees.
Yes. So the offers are generally quite clear in pertaining to fees and duties and when they are payable. It generally states either like within 14 days of request from the conveyancer or immediately once requested by the conveyancer. So it is governed by the offer. In the event of the purchaser trying to delay that, it would effectively constitute a breach because the transfer process can't continue and you can't end. You can't get to a point of registration without those fees and duties being paid. So it would effectively constitute a breach. But as I said, the offer, in most offers, it does stipulate a time period for payment.
So from David Roberts, we've got a question here, and this is maybe something I didn't touch on in the OTP, and maybe we can talk about here. Is could you explain a bit more about the bonds, more of the legal aspect, not just the loan? So let's take two things. Is when we're buying a property where there's a bond, an existing bond on it, there's a settlement process, as well as the part two. If I'm taking a bond, it gets registered. So maybe firstly to mention the fact that there are separate attorneys that deal with it, the bond attorneys appointed by the banks. And then just sort of, if you walk us through the process of firstly settlement and secondly registration of bond against property.
Okay, so with regards to settlements, what the bank will do is that they will take from the date that you request the figures, they will generally issue figures for a period of 90 days, okay? And in addition to that, because if they issue the figures for 90 days, they expect the transfer to go through, and you expect the transfer to go through within that 90-day period, there will be a penalty amount which will be added to the figures. So they will give you figures for 90 days. In addition to that, they'll put a penalty fee, which is I think 3 months interest. That's how it's calculated. So that would be payable. Should you not register the transfer within that 3-month period, then the transferring attorneys will reapply for cancellation figures, and the penalty amount payable will fall away. So you will no longer pay for the penalty amount; you'll just pay for the interest, which will accrue. Okay, which will be payable. In terms of the settlement, in terms of the actual bond, the seller will have to continue paying the bond amount, irrespective of the fact that the figures have been issued, and they'll have to continue to see through their obligations to the bank to pay the bond, and then once the transfer is registered, any amount overpaid will be refunded to them. If that makes sense.
Yeah, perfect. So that's this on the settlement side as a seller. So then
Yes.
if we go as a buyer, now we're going to take a bond out, they appoint bond attorneys to then register the new bond.
Yes, so they will appoint, and then they will then obviously go through a bond originator or through their current banker to obtain a favorable bond. Once the bond has been granted, it will only be payable. The bank will they're quite flexible in terms of when the bond will have to be repaid. So they will the options generally are like, let's say, the 15th of the month or the end of the month. I'm not 100% sure on exactly how the bank will operate, but how the banks operate independently with regards to when it's due. But let's say the bank registers, the transfer registers on the first of the month, then and you agreed that your payments would start the 15th of the month, then they will charge you for that month. Should it go, let's say the transfer registers on the 20th of the month, but you agreed for payments to be made on the 15th, then they will only charge you from the following month.
Yeah.
So it just depends on
the banks themselves.
Yeah.
Sorry. And in terms of that new mortgage that you're taking out, the banks appoint a panel attorney to then register that bond against your title deed. Is that right?
That's it. So basically, as I said, there's generally 3 role players. So there'll be a transferring attorney, a bond cancellation attorney, and a bond attorney. The bond attorney and bond cancellation attorneys are attorneys that are appointed by the banks, and they're on their panels, and they will then run the process on behalf of the banks. With regards to the bond attorneys, all the fees pertaining for the bond are paid by the purchaser. And I'd also just like to add that the tariff is exactly the same as the transfer tariff. So the conveyancing fee is exactly the same as the bond fee. It used to be slightly less. The bond fee used to be slightly less compared to the transfer fee, but that is no longer the case. It's now very much.
So now you're doubling up. And that's something for everyone to be aware of. If you are buying a property, you're paying conveyancing fee, and if you're taking a bond, it's a bond fee as well. So and I think people often forget. For example, if it's fees 20,000 rand to the conveyancing attorney, they forget about the bond attorney, and they have to pay. Suddenly get this invoice 20,000 rand that they jump up and down. So yeah, do be aware that there are those double fees to pay. So Boto, again, regarding investment trust account, in a recent transaction, the conveyancer advised on a fee to invest my deposit as a condition to invest funds. Is it common, and is it allowed, and why?
Yes, it is common. It's an investment fee for you as an attorney to open up that investment account. I think it's administrative, in addition to the fact that we get charged as attorneys to open up those different accounts, because every time you open up another investment account, you have to open it up in a different purchaser's name, and you have to ensure that they are FICA compliant. So you also need to do a FICA check before you can open those investment accounts. So there is a little bit of admin work involved, in addition to the management and the running of the investment. So it is very much normal to be charged investment.
And I mean, you guys are professionals, you get paid for your time. Just confirm something. The actual investment of that money, is that a requirement, or is that optional?
It's a requirement in terms of so let me just differentiate between the deposit and the costs. With regards to the deposit is it's mandatory, it's essential that the deposit amount is invested in a separate investment account under Section 86(4) of the Legal Practice Act. But the costs and transfer duty which you receive, that generally remains in the trust account because of the quick turnaround time. So you generally request the costs and transfer duty right towards the end of the process, and because you're not going to earn anything on moving it, it will generally sit in the trust account to pay SARS, pay ourselves before registration.
Awesome, cool. And then last question for you here from Precious. Who's liable for the penalty from SARS if the process takes longer than 6 months? I assume this is after purchase is signed, transfer takes 8 months. That penalty.
Sorry, I did lose you there for a bit, but I think I got the gist of your question.
Yeah.
I would, I think it would, so the transfer duty amount is definitely the responsibility of the purchaser in most instances. I've actually never come across an instance where it isn't. But let's say that that any amount over and above what the tariff-based transfer duty amount is, I think that would be then dependent on who's at fault for the delay. Was the seller at fault due to the fact that they couldn't, for instance, get rates clearance because they didn't have electricity meters on the property, or whatever the case may be? Then I think that they should be held responsible for that penalty amount payable, as they caused the delay.
Awesome. But that's something that you would maybe recommend is defined in the OTP. So the liability of any penalties would be due to the person found at fault, for example.
Absolutely.
Because otherwise it might be assumed that you because you have to pay the transfer duty is for your account.
Yes,
I do have another one that you have from Ludsy, and it's if I lose my title deeds, what is the process I need to go through to get a new copy?
Okay, so they've actually just currently amended that process. So previously, what you do, previously you could just apply, you sign it's an application affidavit in terms of a regulation 68(1). So you would just sign an affidavit alleging that you're not in possession of the title deed, that it hasn't been pledged or detained by anyone. In the event of you coming across a title deed, it will be returned to the deeds office, and you would just merely sign it, and I would submit it to the deeds office for a new title deed to be issued. However, given the recent influx in fraud cases, the whole system surrounding Regulation 68(1) applications has been amended, and you now need to advertise your property in a newspaper circulating in the area, in the district in which the property falls. So you no longer can just bring that application affidavit, but you now have to first advertise it, and it has to open for you. Then once you've received the advert, you need to then you sign the affidavit together with your advert. You attach your advert, it gets taken to the deeds office, and it needs to lay open there for inspection for 2 weeks to see if there's if anyone comes and lays claim or rejects the transfer or the new title deed being issued. So it is definitely possible, and it can be done, and it's very, it happens quite frequently. But the process they've really just kind of made it a lot more stringent and a lot harder just to kind of go and obtain copies of original title deeds.
And essentially you say that they use newspapers in the local area. Leah did say that the legal fraternity were sort of outdated and need to get up to speed. I don't know who reads newspapers these days, but yeah,
you still need to advertise in a newspaper. And this is a very recent this is a recent amendment. I mean, it's only 5 of 2019, so it only came about in last year that they brought about this amendment to the regulation.
It's crazy. So I suppose part of the challenge is going to find a newspaper firstly. So awesome. So brilliant. But Cara, thank you very much. Those are all the questions we had for you there. Really appreciate your time. And I'm sure a lot of the guys saw that there's a lot of value in having the right person on their team. If they want to get hold of you, where can the guys email you?
Yes, absolutely. They can email me at cfriedman@hadarinc.co.za. I don't know if you just find one. I'll just put it up on the Q&A. And if you've got any further questions or anything, you're more than welcome to email me.
Get in touch. And also we're going to have Leah Haydar on our 6th session talking about tenant evictions, which is sort of close to his heart. So we'll have Leah there from the same firm in a couple of weeks' time. But for now, I'm just going to switch over and share my screen again. But Cara, thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me, Grant.
Cheers.
Well.
Cool. So there. So I mean, like I said, simplifying the conveyancing process is vitally important. You guys have seen that the OTP is very important to understand. And that's sort of the end of where we come now. Next week, I'm going to be talking about tools and research. And really, that's just digging down into the due diligence around your property. I've identified a property. It's that agent telling me it's worth 500,000. Rent's going to be 7,000 rand a month. It's a no-brainer. I'm going to buy this property. But what research have you done outside of relying on the estate agent or the person who's actually got a vested interest in telling you whatever you need to hear to buy this property, so that they can earn their commission or sell their property or anything else in relation to their property? So it's important that we look at tools and research and how to investigate that. One of my favorite parts is where I've made my biggest mistake in property investment was not understanding the research and understanding the area. And that pain that a decision made 15 years ago is still hurting today. It's just about tools and research rather than emotion and ego, which at 25 years old, trying to build a portfolio you sort of run with. And then that's it. So now it's time for you guys, if you have any more, to interrogate me and ask me any questions you might have. So yeah, this is your chance to sort of, like I say, question anything, send me any questions or ask me anything. I did have one question here, which was capital gains tax. So how's capital gains tax calculated on your property? So a quick one is that the way, so firstly, capital gains tax doesn't exist. It's a tax on your physical capital gain. The capital gain is calculated by SARS by taking your base cost off of proceeds. So proceeds are how much you sell the property for. I bought a property a few years ago. I sold it for R1 million now. They take the R1 million. Then they say less base cost. And base cost is made up of a few things. The cost of buying, the capital cost of buying. So that would include your transfer duty, your transfer costs, your capital cost of renovation, so any capital invested in the property during a period of time, and the capital cost of disposing of that property. Those three things cumulatively make up your base cost. You deduct that base cost from, and the purchase, the actual cost of the property itself. They deduct that base cost off of the proceeds and then end up with a number. So let's say I sell a property at R1 million. It cost me 500,000 rand to buy. It cost me 100,000 rand to through the purchase process. I've spent 100,000 rand on capital improvements, and I spent 100,000 rand in terms of estate agent fees and duties in terms of selling it. So it's cost me 800,000 rand base cost off the million. So the capital gain on that property is 200,000. Then, and like I alluded to last week, they take that amount and they apply something called an inclusion rate. SARS determined this in the budget speech. 40% as an individual, 80% as a company, or 80% as a trust. And then they apply your relevant tax percentage against that portion that's remaining to then work out your capital gain. Obviously, as an individual, you have a capital gains allowance, which is provided to you every year, so you can make use of the capital gains allowance. And then you end up paying a taxable portion of that remaining 200,000 to SARS in terms of your annual return. So that's just how the capital gains calculates. So again, proceed less base cost, and base cost is made up of cost of the property, cost of buying the property, capital cost of maintaining or improving that property, and the cost of selling that property. Those four elements. Does Only Realty, let me just go back on to the one other thing here. Does Only Realty avail property management and tenant placement services? If so, at what rate? So we absolutely do. Our speciality from an Only Realty perspective is property management. That's been the core of our business for the last 10, 11 years, is property management. That's what our expertise lies in, is managing your property from an investment perspective. What rate do we use? It depends on what area you are in, to be honest. And again, so if you'd like to contact our team, you can maybe email myself, Grant, at onlyrealty.co.za, and what I can do is I can put you in touch with the relevant franchisee around the country that can give you an indication of their fees in relation to your area. Again, unfortunately, as much as we talk about a property market, each property market is broken down into areas, suburbs, regions, provinces. Same thing for fee structures. Fee structures differ across the country, and it's not a one-size-fits-all option. So it depends on your portfolio, type of property, location, offers you're going to be dealing with, the extent of the service you'd like. So yeah, hopefully that really helps you guys. I've got 2 questions here. So sorry, Rena, I've got OTP here. Oh, here, OTP condition. I'll buy your house at a set price if I sell my house for X. Can you add what I'm selling a house for in OTP? Is that advisable? Yeah, so absolutely. So Rena, I mean, you know, again, any condition that you put as a suspensive condition into your OTP, which is legal, it certainly can be put in there. So, and I would do that, you know, particularly as a seller. If I'm selling a property and somebody needs to sell their property, I want to know as much detail as possible, because the more detail I have, the more binding. Yeah, absolutely. The more info there is, the more binding that contract can be, because by the first two, that just makes things very, very clear. What you don't want it to be is in a space where you say, we must sell a house. Well, for how much? You know, I've got an offer for £4,000. You know, well, that they know to sell a house. So it must be as clear as possible to make sure that there's no ambiguity or misunderstanding or anything else. Because to be honest, that's honestly, in the end of the day, where most stuff ends up in court. I thought you meant this, you actually meant that. We don't have a middle ground. Now we're going to court because we just want to fight with each other because I want to bind you to something. So it's important that you give as much information as possible, but particularly when you are the seller, you really want to bind these guys into very detailed description of what they're doing and when the process is going to become binding from a suspensive condition point of view. So I hope that answers your question there, Rena. Perfect. My pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Done there. And then we've got the last question coming from Botol, which has been great. Off topic. Section 13.6, can I claim it on one property if I have 4 existing, not new developments, and 1 new property, new development, 5 properties in total, which meets the minimum? As far as I'm aware, it is the purchase of 5 or more properties. You know, but let me just clarify here. It's not something that I advocate. I'm not a massive fan of Section 13.6, only because the going in is good, but coming out can bite you. And it's just very important that, again, you speak to advisors that are not only talking about the entry, but as well as the exit. It's the same as a zero tax, zero VAT rate on buying a short-term letting property. You don't, for example, if you're buying from a developer, you get in, you don't pay the VAT, but when you get out, you need to pay the VAT. So it's very, very important that you do speak to an advisor, not only about the entry, but the exit. So what I'm going to say to you, Botta, is I'm going to come back to you on whether you can buy 1 and then 4. I believe you can't. I think you need to buy 5 properties. And I think that needs to be new properties which you're going to take to market. So I don't think they're going to be existing rented out properties. They need to be properties that you are going to be taking to market to rent them out. So yeah, so hopefully that helps your answer. But what I'll do is, Botta, if you don't mind, maybe just dropping me an email at grantedonlyrealty.co.za, and I'll come back with a much better and more comprehensive answer on Section 13.6 for you to help you out in that one. Again, if there are any questions you want me to address for the next session, please drop me a mail as well at grantedonlyrealty.co.za, and I'll do my best to include them in the session, even if I do a Q&A to answer any questions that you sent through to me before we get started with tools and research. Tools and research next week are, I mean, I really enjoy it. I think it's a really good section. It's really good to know and understand your area. What are the tools we use to delve into valuation, not only from an agent perspective, but as investors, what are the things that we're actively looking for, and what tools can we use? And I can also show you how you can get access to those tools, so you're not subject to other people's, to the other gatekeepers of information, which is quite important. Thank you for joining me today. Really appreciate it. Next week is again going to be at 1 o'clock, so we're going to be at 1 o'clock the next few sessions. So next week, Wednesday. Really looking forward to it. And then just again, thank you for joining us on these sessions, and please again invite anybody that you want to, anyone that wants to join in. I mean, anyone, everybody is welcome to these sessions. One last one here from Carol Bottery, just saying agent commissions. Please, agents chasing home prices. You know, yeah, I mean, agent commissions are something that's always contentious, but at the end of the day, you know, you need to pay for what you're getting. If you don't feel you're getting the value service from your agents, you need to then go and find better agents. You know, no agency can claim to be the best in every area. There are certain agencies that are good in certain areas. So it's very, very important that you align with the right guys, and guys are really going to give you value for ultimately what is, to be fair, is a lot of money. But they really need to have the seller's best interest at heart, but as much as the seller's best interest, the buyer as well. So yeah, so it is important. Look, I obviously feel that sometimes the commissions are really earned, and at times they aren't. So, but it's again align with somebody that you, from your perspective, align with from a value perspective in terms of who you are using to sell your property. Thanks very much, everybody. I really appreciate it, and I will see you next week.